Hello. What? Hi. That's the spirit. You guys have a good first day? Thumbs up? Woo. Good for you. We're glad you're here. Glad you had a successful first day, and welcome to the first of our faculty nights this week. We're going to have 3 Monday tonight, tomorrow night, and Wednesday night, and they're all going to be splendid, so I encourage you to attend each and every one of them. Tonight, my name is David Simpson. I'm the program director here at the Fine Arts Work Center. And tonight we're going to hear from poet Kimiko Hahn and writer Debra Taffa and printmaker Andrea Machler. Kimiko and Deborah will read from their work, and Andrew will give an artist talk, and then they'll all sit together up here and answer your questions for a little while afterwards before we all head off for dinner or whatever we're going to be doing. Before we begin, a bit of housekeeping and other items of interest. Kimiko's books will be available for sale at the back of the room, and she'll be signing books at the end of the reading, so be sure to stick around. She has some beautiful books back there. Also, other faculty's books from the other weeks of the summer, of this week and other weeks of the summer, at the sale at the back of the room, and also in the bookstore in the gallery. The gallery is open this evening, and I encourage you, if you haven't seen the show that's up right now, it's called Everyone We Know Is Here. It's a show comprised of work from all former fellows, and it's really beautiful. I advise you to check it out. All the work is for sale, and all the sales will benefit the Fine Arts Work Center and the artists. I'd like to give a big shout out to East End Books, who helps us maintain our bookstore at the back. We have restrooms if you need them down the hall. The sign-up sheet for Thursday's student reading is on that table right there. There are pens, and I've noticed some people have signed up, so I want to give a round of applause to those people. And I highly encourage you, if you're in a writing workshop this week, to sign up and take that leap. You will be so glad you did. And finally, please turn your phones to silent. And once you've done that, the people actually reaching for their phones, thank you. That's so nice. I would like to invite to the stage to introduce Kimiko Hahn, her fellow panelist this evening, Debra Taffa.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. It is my honor and my pleasure to introduce Kimiko Hahn, who needs no introduction. It's a special pleasure for me as a beginning writer to share the stage tonight with someone who is so accomplished and so kind despite all of those accomplishments. Kimiko Hahn is the author of Foreign Bodies, W.W. Norton, March 2020, and 9 other books of poems, including Brain Fever and Toxic Flora, both prompted by science, The Narrow Road to the Interior, a collection that takes its title from Basho's famous poetic journal. Her essay on the Japanese hybrid form, the Zuihitsu and the Toadstool, was published in the American Poetry Review. She has been the winner of a 2010 Guggenheim Fellow, a 2008 American Book Award, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship, and I have not even read half of the awards that she has received. She is generous about passing her gift and knowledge of writing on to other students. She teaches, or to other people. She teaches in the MFA program at Queen's College, CUNY. The Manchester Review praises the strong, driving sense of personal narrative her poems carry. And the Chicago Review of Books notes that she has the unique ability of turning the universally mundane into the uniquely beautiful. In her work, you will find wonders in the quotidian. Likewise, her readers describe her work as alternately wry and affecting, and praise her unique perspective on the daily and the ordinary. Please join me in welcoming Master Kimiko Hahn.
Thank you, thank you. better leave that to you. Yes, you're so high-tech. Yes, perfect, thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, David, Sarah, Bree, and Miracle for the beginning of a wonderful week, and thanks to my students also for the beginning of a wonderful week. My most recent book, Foreign Bodies, is, the title is taken actually from a long poem that is based on Dr. Chevalier Quixote Jackson, who was a doctor who he was a laryngologist, and he took tiny items out of children's upper respiratory system. And all 2,000 plus things that he took out, he saved, and he put into the Mutter Museum, and which I've seen, and you can see them too in Philadelphia. It's pretty amazing. When I was writing that poem and thinking about the term foreign bodies, what they're called, those little objects, of course I began thinking, well, my grandmother's body was a foreign body. And I began really thinking of expanding and really thinking about the term in different ways. The poem I'm going to read has to do less with foreign bodies than it does thinking about death, as my father was in steep decline as I began to write the poems that would become this book. So foreign bodies, objects, hoarding, death. So this is called A Dusting. However, mother has reappeared, say, as motes on a feather duster. Scientists say the galaxy was created thus. This daybreak, she seeds a cumulus cloud. Wherever mother is bound, she's joined ashes, ashes, or dirt underfoot, or bits off Tower North and Tower South. Repurpose does not arrive whole cloth. From stardust, dust bunnies, dust bowl, dust unto dust, Whitman's boot soles in his Leaves of Grass, and Dunbar's What of His Love, What of His Lust. To samples that astronomers collect, dust is where the sparrow bathes herself. Not a cloud in the sky, mother says, as she hangs the laundry outside. Father paints en plein air, and we girls sweep crumbs under the rug. This summer, father sees inferno everywhere. No dust-ups from little girls. As a consequence, one scribbled on the dustbins of history, and the other dusted for fingerprints. And the mother lived in a vacuum. Inside the senseless corridors, the daughter cannot respire. Inside the vulgar cosmic, the mother cannot be revived in streaming, wet traffic. Nowadays, I lie down in the sun to see my mama moting around as sympathetic ash. Yes, one morning, whether misty or yellow, I'll be soot with her, elegiac and original. Oftentimes, actually more often than not, I take material from outside sources, sometimes even researching, as I did with Chevalier Quixote Jackson. This poem began as some scraps of newspaper clippings. A daughter, after being asked if I write the occasional poem. After leaving Roxruja, after crossing Mexico with a coyote, after reaching at midnight that barren New Mexico border, a man and his daughter looked to Antelope Wells for asylum and were arrested. After forms read in Spanish to the Mayan-speaking father, after a cookie but no water, after the wait for the lone bus to return for their turn, after boarding, after the little girl's temperature spiked, she suffered 2 heart attacks, vomited, and stopped breathing. After medics revived the 7-year-old at Lordsburg Station, after she was flown to El Paso where she died, the coroner examined the failed liver and swollen brain. Then Jacqueline's chest and head were stitched up, and she returned to Guatemala in a short white coffin to her mother, grandparents, and dozens of women preparing tamales and beans to feed the grieving. In Quechan, W-E means mouth. Something a bit lighter. This is from Brain Fever. Most of the poems in Brain Fever were prompted by not just articles in the Science Times, but specifically those having to do with neuroscience. Not that I knew anything about neuroscience, not that I even now know anything about neuroscience, but that's, the language of science for me is really exotic. So I am immediately attracted to that and to things I don't know very much about. So this was prompted from an article on dream theory. The dream of knife, fork, and spoon. I can't recall where to set the knife and spoon. I can't recall which side to place the napkin or which bread plate belongs to me, or how to engage in benign chatter. I can't recall when more than one fork, which to use first, or what to make of a bowl of water. I can't see the place cards or recall any names. The humiliation is impressive, the scorn. No matter how much my brain revises the dinner to see if the host was a family member, I can't recall which dish ran away with which spoon. I'm going to zip up to very new poems. Almost all the poems that I've been writing in the past 5, maybe 10 years have been in forms. And then sometimes they stay in those forms, other times I take them apart and they still retain the ghost of that form. During the pandemic, I was casting around for forms that I'd never heard of, and I came upon the glossa, which, and I'm not going to go into a lecture here, don't worry, but which starts out with a 4-line, a quatrain from another poem, and then uses those lines at the end of subsequent stanzas. It's easier to hear it than it is to describe it. And there's a bit of a rhyme scheme as well. There are other requirements, but I kind of did away with them. So this is titled Elizabeth's Cabeza. So in a glossa, the quatrain that's quoted is called the cabeza, which means head in Spanish. And this is based on Elizabeth Bishop's poem, The First Death in Nova Scotia, which is about a little girl, Elizabeth, and her first experience being in the parlor and seeing her little cousin, Arthur, in a coffin. Okay, Elizabeth's Cabeza. But how could Arthur go, clutching his tiny lily, with his eyes shut up so tight, and the roads deep in snow? I don't know how Arthur could go, with just a lily, no parka or boots. Elizabeth's question would follow over the years, even after she'd left Nova Scotia for agreeable climes, below the equator. Yes, I wish to know, but how could Arthur go? I wish to learn the map my mother selected, or if her departure and destination were destiny, and if mine will be the same climbs, the same cloud or dust cloud, after a parkway, black and rainy. Clutching his tiny lily, Elizabeth thought he'd know something when the time came to stand and climb out of the box and into the light, when he'd open his eyes at the palace, when he'd bow to the royals standing in the fluffy white, with his eyes shut up so tight, meant sleep. It means feeling tired of seeing things like the stuffed loon that his father'd shot on the coast. What a day that was, Uncle stomping in with rifle and bloody bird. The loon's eyes, too, were closed, like the roads deep in snow. Another glossa, and this is using 4 lines from a Lucille Clifton poem, and the title of her poem is Poem in Praise of Menstruation. And my title is If is a Conjunction. If there is a river more beautiful than this, bright as the blood, red edge of the moon, if I can conjure such radiance and safety as expressed shelter, then my task as woman will be quenched. Yes, moon, yes, calendar, if there is a river that will cleanse my generous innermost abyss, then echo syllables of consonants. After all, red is a wish more beautiful than this river that men call foul and view a girl infirm, though they brood if she does not breed. Yes, a woman pronounces her throbbing inside, bright as the blood, reliable as the planets, kind as the cocoon, crafty as paper. I know girls who've gone mad. Some left us livid. We owe them to commune with the red edge of the moon, if a pantoum, and I'll just read it instead of describing it. Not nothing again. I think of nothing but wind or the black universe, though we see the sky be strewn with stars and planets, or see the black universe as a chest of puzzles and toys with stars and planets, a circle with rings. As if a chest of puzzling toys, I wonder about my pink bear, a circus with rings, and a carousel of armadillos. I wander with my pink bear. I think of nothing as wind, also as a carousel of armadillos and bees strewn across the skies. I have probably most of my writing life spoken back to and corresponded in different ways with other writers. It was a writing prompt that actually I was gifted, in a sense, from my first writing workshop teacher when I was a freshman in college. So I love to play with other writers' lines. So this is back to Elizabeth Bishop and her Sestina, which is very childlike in tone. So this is a villanelle. The title is Villanelle, with a line borrowed from Bishop. And the line I've borrowed from her is, "The grandmother sings to the marvelous stove." The child looks out the window at the peeling barn. The mother sits on the roof and waves at her. The grandmother sings to the marvelous stove. The child has put away her own marvel stove because her grandmother is baking real bread. The child looks out the window at the peeling barn. The two inside are prepping dinner for 3 if the mother comes down from the roof. The grandmother sings to the marvelous stove, a song about some mother on some roof, lightly the mother that is her daughter. The child looks out the window at the peeling barn. The child hums along while she stands to survey her reeling barn and to hear as the grandmother sings to the marvelous stove. She's drawn at least 6 barns today. She stops humming and sings her own song. She looks at her mother atop the peeling barn while the grandmother sings to marvel the stove. I'm going to end with this Zuihitsu because that's what we were doing in class today. It's a list. I'll just say that. It's a kind of list piece. And the title is Nouns That Have a Religious Quality. Lacquer, wood, moss, rock, straw. The lacquer can be black or orange, and even a personal item, such as a natsume for tea powder, named after its resemblance to the jujube and, father told me, a high-ranking tea utensil. I have a plastic one I bought when I took a few classes in Niigata, 1972. Moss either in a garden or under a tree. I love to discover a clump with British soldiers, although now that I look it up, I see it is the name for a lichen. Further research, I find Polytrichaceae. One site notes they have teeth, and one kind is known as bristly haircap. I might be wrong, considering there are over 1,200 species of moss, but I think I'm correct. There are also moss imposters, blood. Of course, there are common words, although they have little personal meaning anymore: chalice, altar, liturgy. Also, cross, although the word can be a noun, post with traverse bar or a hybrid, verb and adjective. The most important object in our whole apartment is a stack of flat stones or a single plain stone around which I tie a tiny bib. R asked why I have such things in several nooks, and I told him about Jizo, how she or he is the Buddhist patron saint of children, hence the bib. We stack stones to help the babies who do not make it to the afterlife and whose task it is to dig up stones. More than blood, cerise, maroon, scarlet, vermilion. More than blood, incense, not the noun, but the verb. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimiko. Can we have another round of applause for Kimiko Hahn? Thank you. Wow, that's a great start. And to continue this wonderful thing that Kimiko started here, I'm going to invite one of our amazing summer program assistants, Bree Reed, up to the stage to introduce Debra Taffa.
In my first few memories of meeting Debra Taffa last year, we were both huddled away into a back office of a bookstore in Santa Fe. There was nothing extraordinary about that small space with its boxes of books waiting to be categorized and shelved. But when Deborah entered, though, she was electric, with an atmosphere that comes with taking center stage. And it felt transformed, as if shifting into a kind of green room. As she and the store owner threaded the hidden microphone through her blazer, careful not to tangle it in her hair, it felt like I was in the room with a rock star. When she took to the podium, she commanded the audience effortlessly in such a way that it remained with me since, and it is here with us now. A member of the Yuma Quechan Nation and a descendant of the Laguna Pueblo, Taffa earned her MFA in Iowa City and earned fellowships from the Rona Jaffe Foundation, MacDowell, Tin House, and PEN America. Her memoir, Whiskey Tender, is forthcoming from HarperCollins Harper and has won a Santa Fe Writers Literary Award. Her other essays have been published in The Rumpus, Boston Review, Salon, and Best of Brevity. Currently, she is the director of the MFA in Creative Writing at the Institute of American Indian Arts. Please give Debra Taffa a hand.
Kamatham, Gwadzi. As she said, I'm Deborah Jackson Taffa, born for the Keepers of the Water Clan and the Yuma Quechan Nation, as well as for the Big Badger Clan and Little Corn Clan at Laguna Pueblo. My mother is Chicana from Socorro, New Mexico, so I'm a true child of the desert. I am grateful to FOC for bringing me here this week. It's so lovely. And I recognize the Wampanoag people who stewarded this land here for centuries. Tonight, I'm going to be reading from Whiskey Tender, the memoir that I have forthcoming from HarperCollins. And then to finish, since you're all writers, I thought I would talk a little bit about process and explain how autoethnography as an imaginative mode of inquiry has helped me abandon what I'm calling an existing default lens in my life. 1. When my parents left their wedding reception, Mom was sober. Dad, of course, drove. He sped towards 4th Avenue, the main thoroughfare in Yuma, cutting into the opposite lane on corners, fishtailing with a groom's finesse. Mom grew scared. She hiked up her wedding dress, reached her long leg over his thigh, and stomped the brake with her high-heel shoe. The tires locked up. The car swung wide to the right before spinning them all the way around to the left, showing them the surprised expressions of people in other cars. It was like we were on a ride at the Yuma County Fair, Mom said. The car slammed into the side of a busy downtown bar. The Plymouth's front end was mangled. Steam poured out of the radiator. It was a Sunday afternoon in April 1963, and the day was still light. Afternoon drinkers came flowing out of the bar's smoky interior like rice throwers out of a cathedral in a haze of incense and prayer. Being the eldest of 15 kids had made Mom conspicuous in this small town, and the bar was her father Juan's favorite, so some of the regulars and barflies realized she was a Herrera girl and wanted to know if she was okay. Sirens started up in the distance. A couple of biker chicks helped Mom out of the car, and she stood with them on the sidewalk in front, staring at the damaged headlight and hood. In her hurry to get out, she'd caught the train of her wedding dress in the door, and it had ripped. When she saw the torn fabric, she started crying. She told us, "I could see your dad through the window of the car with his forehead rested on the wheel, and I knew exactly what he was thinking." Dad was from the Yuma Reservation across the train tracks and river, and he was worried the town cops were going to book him again. But when the cops pulled up at the accident scene and looked at Mom, plopped on the curb in a puff of white satin, mascara running down her cheeks, they decided to be merciful and let Dad go. Mom said they felt sorry for her because she was a good local Catholic girl who'd married a crazy Indian. When Dad walked in the front door and heard her telling us the story, he laughed and said she was wrong. He said the cops let him go not because they pitied her, but because Mom was beautiful and pretty people got away with shit. He pulled off his black boots and lifted his holy socks onto the coffee table. He put his arm around her and said getting away scot-free on their wedding day was the first sign Mom's charm would work magic in his life, like a lucky rabbit's foot or a powerful tattoo. He reminded Mom how romantic he'd been at their wedding, how he'd refused to let her sisters decorate the car with do-it-yourself flowers because the phony tissue paper looked too common for a woman of her caliber. Instead, he had performed a top-secret midnight operation, sneaking into St. Thomas Indian Mission's garden on the reservation, where he cut a bunch of roses to string over the roof of the car. Mom groaned, "Don't brag about stealing from the church." But the two of them laughed, and Dad went in the kitchen to grab a snack. Mom's protestations never fooled me. She loved the memory of the stolen roses, as well as Dad's claim that her beauty swayed the cops. But what made her light up especially was the way he called her his lucky charm. This is how my parents twisted bad things around, seeing the appearances of events in funhouse mirrors, stretching memories tall and pretty when they were really goofy and squat. They knew a story could be told in various ways, and this is how they chose to shape theirs, and how they would teach me to shape mine as well, by molding their wedding day car accident into their first blessing as a couple. 2. Oh, I'm forgetting my slides. Hang on. Back. Oh, there. Oh, there they are. 2. We sisters were broken girls. We twisted our ankles sailing off playground swings, toppled out of tamarisk trees, plucked yellow jacket and broken glass stingers out of our skin. We slammed our fingers in car doors, burned our feet in campfires, and then sat in the waiting room at the Yuma Indian Hospital, ice pressed to injuries. Joan broke her wrist. I broke my collarbone. Lori had a 2-inch scar down the center of her chest. Monica slipped through the handrails of a tall metal slide and landed 20 feet below. The reservation was rowdy in the 1970s. Scars were a main source of pride. Put a little whiskey in Dad's beer, and he got to talking about his friends. Crushed under a fast-moving train, stabbed in the chest during an alley fight, propped against a tree at a public park with a hot needle sticking out of an arm, killed in a landmine explosion in Vietnam. Mom tried to shush Dad when he told us his stories, but he said we needed to know the truth if we were going to survive, to hear how tough the world could be. Swagger was a sure way for us kids to get praise. Despondency hung over the reservation, and when tiny children acted rebellious, adults saw hope and verve. A sassy girl was a girl who might make it, even against the odds. My sisters and I did what we could to impress. We rejected all things girly. We painted our dolls' faces with markers, tattooing their chins in the style of our female ancestors. We chopped off their hair, and when they grew grotesque, threw their heads in the trash can and danced their bodies around, calling out like barkers selling tickets to see Geronimo at the World's Fair. Come and see the amazing headless wonders. We were unruly Indian girls, not the friendly Thanksgiving Day type who knew how to cook and behave. Our mother said it was too late to teach us any manners. Dad always said, broken bones grow back stronger, raising us the same way his older brother Gene had raised him. A father's job was to control the pace of the world's wounding, to dole out the pain in slightly bigger doses each time so his kids wouldn't break under the pressure. This is what I think of when I think of my sisters and me. We didn't get anything for free, and we blossomed because of it. Blood flowering into bruises, skin thick and ripened in the Sonoran desert sun. I hope you hear humor in this reading, because there's no way to write about my moral education without it. To convey a childhood lived in a settler colonial state takes humor. Otherwise, the frustration will kill you. And for those of you writing memoirs, you can't rush to that grace. I rewrote this book so many times. It's a true palimpsest, and also evidence of what a petty and overly serious person I am, because it took me so long to get it right. In Pueblo, in the Pueblo language, there's a word, woitziki. It means, for life's sake we do this. So remember to remember a consciousness that is essential to community. Keep to a vision that has hopefulness in it. Woitziki asks, what kind of ancestor will you be? Our great-greats survived an apocalypse, and now it's our job to reinvent the world. I decided to write a memoir when I was originally reluctant about it, because I saw a huge opportunity in the fact that so little is known about the diversity of the Americas. There are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States, but historically we've been flattened into this term, Indian. This misnomer given to us by explorers who thought they'd found India was intentionally maintained because it was better not to acknowledge the many distinctive cultures and organized governments that existed here before their arrival. They wanted to convince people that the Americas were mostly empty, populated by an unthinking block of heathens because it made it easier to justify taking the land. Think about it. Celtic speakers alone are defined as the Welsh, Breton, Irish Gaelic, Scots Gaelic, Cornish, and Manx. Yet very few people know anything about the distinct languages, mythologies, and belief systems of their own neighbors here on this continent. Where culture is respected, distinctions matter. This slide is just a few of the forgotten histories and the governmental policies I've hung on the arc of my personal narrative. So this memoir is only tangentially about me. It's designed to inform people about environmental ruin via the extractive industries. Our rivers were dammed, our deserts were dried, our lands became the testing ground for atomic weapons. It's designed to reveal all that we've lost. My grandparents were sent to Indian boarding schools, which led to an era of tribal intermarriage, of lost languages and lifeways. My father took part in a federal program known as the Indian Relocation Act, or Public Law 959. It was an assimilation program that created the greatest migration of Indian people moving off reservation in the history of our country, from the 1950s to the 1970s. Everybody has heard of the great African American migration. Well, there was one in Native America too. My father was trained as a welder and moved our family to the Navajo reservation so he could work in one of their coal-fired power plants. Is that counterintuitive to imagine indigenous people working dirty jobs? Probably. But the truth is that the government trained my father's generation to be servants to a higher class. It's counterintuitive to picture my memoir as a story of migration, but the book has been written like an immigrant's tale. Look at the intergenerational leap. You cannot see it too well, but my father and his brothers on the top, and my dad and me and my sisters on the bottom. Look at how much our life has changed in just one generation. My parents grew up in a generation that really believed assimilating to capitalist mainstream views was the only way we could be accepted in this country. And as a young child, I believed my parents. But over time, I began to resent the educational system for being so quiet and disdainful about my ancestors. The book's arc dramatizes the way I realized I wanted to learn more about my people, and I wanted to be more than a model minority. I wanted to live in a way that gave me freedom of choice over freedom of alienation. People like me move from generational struggle to generational struggle. As an indigenous mother, I could never depend on my own community and my kids' schools to instill my value system in them. You don't have enough in common with most Americans as an indigenous mother for that to happen, and it therefore falls on you to sometimes override your child's education. When they reach a certain age, they hit a period where they begin to wonder if your views are odd. They ask, wait a minute, when you were a teenager and you were depressed, why did you go to a medicine man instead of seeing a therapist? Or no one else's mother has some sort of special animal that is kind of their totem. Why do you have these things? And you tell them all your stories, like the girl who shapeshifted into a mountain lion, the lovers who turned into mountains. You emphasize relational thinking, symbiotic and symbolic living. You tell them that they have to choose their own worldview, that it can't be handed to them by you. Carl Jung sums up the indigenous mentality with the term participation mystique. To him, the indigenous identification with the earth is very primitive psychology. It denotes a psychological connection with objects, which in his mind means that we only have a partial identity. To him, our mentality is a child's way of seeing the world. And slowly I see my kids kind of understanding this, and it's difficult. I promised I would finish my talk by addressing how autoethnography as an imaginative mode of inquiry has helped me abandon an existing default lens. And for me, that would be this sort of cultural cringe I had about being Native, and I had about this participation mystique growing up. To illustrate how I've changed, I'm going to tell you a quick story. One of my kids has always been skeptical about my indigenous belief systems, right? He majored in philosophy at Yale. And in the past, it sometimes really hurt my feelings that he didn't understand how I had an education in both indigenous and Western thought. Now, every year for 20 years, we floated this beautiful spring-fed river in the Ozarks. It's a world-class water because the communities in southern Missouri voted against dams there in the 1970s. It's spring-fed, and you hit these clear blue water spots that bubble up from underground as you float down it. So we get our canoes and we name our boats on the very first trip we ever took. We do like 50 miles, 4 nights. We camp on sandbars. And I noticed that all the dragonflies hang around my boat. And so I named my boat the SS Dragonfly. And for 20 years, I talked to and I watched these dragonflies, and I think of them as part of me. And my son teases me, and we race our boat sometimes, and I follow the dragonflies, and they teach me to hug the shore. And the kids never know how I always lead. I'm like always on the shoreline. That kind of sucks me down. And the dragonflies taught me that. But I tell them, oh, it's the dragonflies, and they laugh at me. They call me Captain. Some of them, they used to call me Captain Dan, from Forrest Gump, because he always gets like a feeling, like, oh, I have a feeling. Mom has one of her feelings. So during the pandemic, I'm in Hawaii with my daughter, and I can't come home for our annual canoe trip. And our husband and my kids, they go without me. And it's the first time in 20 years that I'm not with them. And the first night when they're setting up their tents, they start talking about me, and then suddenly my son yells, "Look!" And they all turn around, and my husband says, there are thousands of dragonflies hovering over the water in front of their campsite. I believe in the earth's reciprocity. I believe in magic. And writing this book and celebrating my heritage has made my belief stronger, and it's helped me lose some of that cultural cringe. And in the end, I think that's one of the greatest gifts of writing. The act of storytelling changes us. It heals us. And it doesn't matter how long it takes you to publish. It doesn't matter how long it took me to finish this book. Because Woitziki, I was not doing it for a career. I was doing it to figure out what it meant for me to be human. Thank you.
Thank you, Debra. Can we have another big round of applause for Debra Taffa? So, and now we're going to continue. I'm going to invite Lynn Kortenhouse up to the stage. Lynn is the president of Fox Board of Trustees, and Lynn is going to introduce Andrea Machler. Lynn.
Thank you, David. I think we're good. Thank you all. I'm actually here this week as an artist, as all of you are. And I'm taking Andrea Machler's class for probably the, umpteenth time. I first met Andrew probably over close to 25 years ago. I hadn't been doing any of my own work because I had my own practice, day job, if you will, in Boston. And I was invited to take an intensive weekend workshop with Michael Mazer. And that unlocked my artistic vernacular that I guess I had been storing up for close to 15, 18 years and hadn't picked up a pencil or a paintbrush. And after that weekend, I turned to my friends who hosted me and I said, I can't leave. Like, I can't leave. I just started. And then I called my office and I said, so you're on your own. I'm not leaving. And they said, are you coming back? And I said, I don't know. And so I stayed a few weeks, but the next week, Andrew was teaching. And that to me was a progression of what Mazer had started with me. And what I adore about Andrew is that he is not just a teacher, he's a quiet leader for each of us in our artistic practice. And he just quietly stays in the room, talks to you about different techniques, different ways of printmaking, because after all, he is a master printer. But he is really a master mentor and has been for me for many, many years. And so, I can read accolades of his background, but to me, he's very special, and I think it speaks to the Fine Arts Work Center and how the teachers here, the faculty, are just awesome people, many of whom are former fellows, and I will say Andrew is a former fellow. And people keep coming back because of the inspiration that each of the faculty members brings to this wonderful place for artists and writers like all of us. Now, Andrew does have a day job. Other than being an artist and a master printer, he owns Jungle Press Editions in Brooklyn, New York, where he does collaborate with other artists making editions in lithography, etching, woodcut, and monoprint. And his own work in printmaking and painting has been exhibited in New York, Boston, LA, and he's taught at the Yale School of Art, RISD, and Hunter College, and I think Bard College, he told me. His collaborative print work is included in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, MoMA, and the Whitney Museum. And he has been described as a master printer, and his experimental approach to lithography has been praised by many. But for me, he's the master mentor. And so I've so enjoyed working with him over the years, and I invite him to come up and speak to all of you. Andrew.
Wow, what an introduction. It's kind of hard to follow. Thank you so much, Lynn, and thanks to everyone for coming. So I got my start in printmaking in Boston with Herb Fox, who was on Bromfield Street in downtown Boston, had a lithographic workshop. And at that time, I was 19, and I was also studying at Cornell at the art school there. So I was combining the summers doing printmaking mostly, and painting and sculpting during the rest of the year. So I have a dual practice. I'm also painting, and I think that my work in painting has really informed my approach to printmaking. So I'm working I'm going to show you a few paintings first and then get into some of the more collaborative work. But the paintings, let's see if I can do this right. This is an oil on canvas, it's about 6x4, and I'm looking a lot at kind of abstraction from, there we go, abstraction from nature. So I'm thinking a lot, I started as a landscape painter, thinking a lot about the light as color, and moving from kind of an initial reaction to looking at something to then something that when you look at further and the more you unpack it visually, then you get rewarded the more you look at it. Hopefully the more you see when you are up in it. So these all have references to, I spent a lot of time in New Hampshire as a kid, to forests, oceans, but now, since I've been living in New York, there's a kind of an osmosis of what I'm going and looking through the cityscape there. So that has also had a big influence on some of the motifs that that come up in the painting. This is a little bit smaller. It's maybe 3 by 7, something like that. So you can kind of see some of the motifs, like this kind of broken up piece on the bottom here and up in the upper right-hand side. They're kind of playing around with this horizon that keeps showing up, which has a lot to do with coming back to the ocean. In this one, this is also on canvas. It's maybe 5 by 3, something like that. This has a little bit more kind of a searching quality, you know, the pentimenti of trying to find a structure. When I was starting out as an artist, I was very drawn to Giacometti and how his kind of searching line to find the form ends up being, the drawing ends up being kind of more of traces of searching for the form rather than actually finding the form in and of itself at the beginning. This is a little bit taller, maybe 7 feet. And let's see where we're going. Okay, so moving into printmaking. So I'm also making prints related to a lot of my work in painting and drawing. This is a lithograph that has maybe, I don't know, 50 colors in it or something. So I got the proofing done. So there's a stage in making a print where you're doing the proofing and then you come up with the finished proof. And I realized that it would take me probably a year to actually print it because there are too many colors. So I ended up with an edition of something like 3 of this one. And it's pretty small. It's maybe like 25 or 30 by 18, something like that. Oh, I'm going backwards, wait. There we go. So this is a lot of my practice involves collage. So I studied with a painter when I was at Yale named George McNeil, who was part of the New York school, kind of later New York school, and he said that one of his practices was taking at the beginning of the day, cut up pieces of colored paper and just arranging them without any kind of like, you know, gluing them down or anything, just to try to get an idea, almost like warm-up exercises. So with collage, I work like that too, and then sometimes I transform the collages into lithographs. So this is a translation of a collage, and it's called L'Avventura, which I'm not sure why after the Antonioni movie, but it has this kind of cutout shape you see where the tape is here. Those are actually all printed, so the tape is actually just paper that's been printed to look like tape. This is a kind of a mate to it, and it's maybe 4.5 by 16 or something like that. Again, all based on a collage that I made on my wall and then reconfigured as a print. This is a little bit more recent. It's a lithograph, and it has 2 colors. So sometimes when you're building lithography, the density of the wash that you use is, you're able to kind of create a little bit more space in the page by using different transparencies of gray. This is a pretty new one in the last year. And for my students, this is all made with cut up pieces of the Luan plywood. So there's an initial matrix that's cut up into individual strips, inked by hand, and then put all back together like a puzzle, and then run through the press, and it's maybe 30 by 25, something like that. There are different iterations, so sometimes when you have done all the work to make a certain matrix, you want to, capitalize on the amount of time you spent. So I'll ink it up in different ways and try to find a different kind of mood or tempo to the arrangement. Also, when you're working with woodcut and other kinds of printmaking, you have the initial print that you make, and then you have what Mike Mazer used to call the cognate, or the knowing print, which is what's left over on the plate printed. Mike was a big mentor for me. He kind of brought me in here, introduced me to artists that were working, and he was one of the first people to work in the shop, to come and make prints in my shop. So I was very, he was very involved with kind of starting me off. This is another larger woodcut, also with collage in it. And this has the different, this grid of circles, which is basically just a print from a large cutout half circle of pegboard. This is Hugh Steers' print. So Hugh Steers came in, he was among the first artists that I worked with. This is called White Gown. It's a lithograph, and he had taken some of these motifs from his paintings. And these were some of the last works that he made in 1995. Sink and Bowl and Blue Rug. Yeah, just kind of very tender moments from that era. Okay, this is Joan Snyder, who I also met here. So Mike Mazer had this printmaking workshop in the summer where he would invite different artists in to work with master printer Bob Townsend. And Bob Townsend had been working with Joan Snyder here. She lives near me in New York. So I invited her in to make some prints. And these are combinations of lithography, monotype, carved wood, kind of intaglio. And so she kind of all puts it all together, which is something that really kind of opened my eyes as far as how do you make a print that's painterly? How do you bring a painter's, inspiration and ideas into a print? And one of the ways to do that is to vary the density and the place in the page where the ink sits. So this is another one of Joan's called Wild Roses. And the ink that is ending up on the very outside portion of the print is really, really sitting off of the page. It's kind of hard to tell from here, but I became kind of, obsessed with this idea of creating a kind of a 3D effect to having, all those layers. Oh, and this is from a Thoreau poem. And she repeats it twice through the etching and then woodcut on top. This is one of the lithographs that Michael Mazer made back in the 90s when I first started. And here's another one. So I got the opportunity to work with Nicole Eisenman in 2009 and 10. We had both been teaching up at Bard, and she wanted to do printmaking. She wanted to stop painting, so she stopped painting for a year, and she worked at 3 different workshops with me, Harlan Weaver, and Marina Ancona. And these are some of the lithographs that she made during that period. This is called Drummer. They're all, you can see the edge of the stone here. So a lot of these have been printed right. So she drew all the way to the edge of the stone, which is not common. This is called Sloppy Barroom Kiss. It's maybe like this, so it's a little more intimate. But a lot of these motifs she's taking from her paintings and kind of recycling them into drawings and paintings. And this is called Tea Party, so it was around this time when the Tea Party was active, and she has this kind of, at one point we went to the Metropolitan Museum has a print study room, and we went there to look at old master prints, and one of them was a 19th century French printer named Rudolph Bresden, who used a lot of ink and pen and ink in his on the stone. And I was thinking when she came back, she also saw the Picasso series that he did with the Crummling brothers, 391 or something like that. Number of prints in this series where they kind of mixed oil and water together somehow to create image. So she said, well, I want to do that. Can you do that? And I said, sure, let's do it. But I didn't know how to do it. So we went back and we flooded the stone with water, and she poured on this greasy, oily ink on there, and she said, is this going to work? And I was like, maybe, yeah. But it actually did, and it looks like this kind of weird, turgid, like polluted sky, which, and it's big. This is maybe like a 4 by 3 foot print. So the edges, you can see there's kind of like these curves and divots out of it. This is because the stone weighs, like 400 pounds or something like that. So over the years, people dropped it, it chips off, and they try to, smooth it out. But to get this around the studio, I have a hydraulic lift with, it's no deal. I wanted to show some people in my class are working with watercolor monotype. So that's where you're painting on a kind of a frosted mylar, textured mylar with watercolor, and then it's transferred to the damp sheet. So this is a series of Melissa Meyer watercolor monotypes. And there were a lot more than what are here, but there's a way to get the ghost image to kind of sit behind the new image, the new layer when you keep working on the same plate. This is Ellen Birkenblit. She's a painter, and she uses these kind of like calico quilts that she makes and stretches onto for her canvas. So there's this sized canvas that she paints on. So here, what we did was we copied each one of those fabrics and made them as either a 3 or a 4 color lithograph. And so that is printed underneath the whole thing. And then the stone gets printed on top. So the stone is all that black imagery with the teeth and the mouth there. So it has this kind of dimensional feel to it. And they're maybe 3 by 4 feet, something like that. And they have this kind of dimension to them coming off because in order to get that black ink to sit on there, there has to be a lot of it to cover all that other stuff. Here's the palette for one of the plates that we are working on that has a lot of colors. This is Tunji Adini Jones, a series of 6 lithographs that he made from smaller stones And there's a lot of kind of downtime and processing that needs to happen, so the artist is sitting there waiting for me to kind of catch up with their process. So he had been working, and he kept on saying, do you have another stone? Do you have another stone? And I'm thinking, yeah, this is going to be great. But he ended up drawing on 6 of them, and there was a suite of 6 of these, and he found this blue color that really kind of looks almost like a midnight light, so he called them midnight voices. And there's a kind of a, sometimes you really have to search for the figure in them, because it's almost really abstracted, and also when you're actually looking at the print, there's a little bit of a delay time because the eye adjusts to the light that's made by that kind of dark blue. Then this is a larger one. It's probably 4 by 3 of the same kind of motif, but just with more colors that he has more like in his paintings. This is a Jacqueline Humphreys print. So she has been using these stencils that kind of are created by kind of breaking down photography of the surface of a canvas, and that's printed over this woodcut. That pink around the edge is actually a really fluorescent pink. This is another one that has a really kind of a raw woodcut gray behind it, and then black ink on top. This is called Meh, and it's small. It's maybe this big, but she's been playing with these emoticons for a while. These are a couple of her lithographs from a little bit before, but I wanted to show you how this like theme and variation, using the same plates or stones and then varying the color, can give you a kind of a group that will, talk to each other across the room, that kind of thing. Oh, I wanted to show you this because sometimes I get into trouble by agreeing to do too much. And this was a Richard Estes print. He's a photorealist painter, and the gallery said, "You're going to need 2 months." I said, "Yeah, sure, I can do that." And then I had no place to dry them because there were 100 of them. I had to clothesline all over my studio and hang them from the walls. So there's like tiny little passages to get around there. Anyway, this is the finished print. Those little pieces of salt on top of the bread are also one. There's 50 colors in this print. Okay, and it was a real labor of love. Okay, this is Sam Messer, fellow in 1981-82, former fellow. These are all his obsessed with typewriters. So these are all variations on this theme of the typewriter. And we were working in the time when there was this shutdown, and we were like, I don't know, what are you doing? I'm not sitting at home. Why don't you come in, okay? And just 2 people. The streets were completely deserted. But they're all related, and sometimes he'll take just pieces of paper and cut it and stuff it into the top like that. This is Jennifer Mack Watkins, and these are 2 related images called Black Boy Hope 1 and Black Boy Hope 2. And she made the background this kind of almost like this night sky by spritzing gum down on the stone, and then we printed the opposite, the negative of it. And there's also 2, these are also hers. This is called Space Girl, and there's a mate to this one, Space Boy. And those are all done also from the stone. So this is Jill Moser. I've been working with her for many years, and she uses this kind of combination of woodcut and plate lithography. So you get this, again, like something coming out, something going in. This is Mark DeSuvero. He is obsessed with stone lithography, so he comes in every 6 or 8 months and draws. You can see the stones there. They're, you know, substantial, and he draws this calligraphic image that is then printed in bright colors usually. That's silver on orange. Oh, here we go. This is February James, and we're looking at, you know, taking a shot for the camera. She made these lithographs with hand coloring, so each one has this one motif on the right, this figure, and then she changes the with watercolor, so each one becomes this kind of unique impression. Elizabeth Hazen, she's in the shop now. This is from last week. She's working on this print. This is pretty much complete. It's a lot of colors. This is Jameson Green, and it's he did these prints of Cain and Abel, and there's a lot of hand coloring and painting that he went back in and did. This has become very popular, where you have an edition to print, and then you make a lot of hand alterations throughout the stack to make each one kind of an individual. There's another, and you see this other little figure. He spent a lot of time kind of just redoing and moving things around on each one. That is more like as it is before. Okay, this is Judith Lanaire's stones. She has this little collection of trolls and other little people that she brings in, and then she just one day propped up a glove that we use to, you know, clean up with. Oh, this is the rainbow roll. Everyone wants to know about that. It's basically just 3 colors put together, and you can see it kind of goes behind the troll. And the glove. This is literally printed like a week ago. 1 in blue and 1 in yellow. So that is it for me. Thank you. Check.
I have one of them. Oh, no, you should start.
This is a really easy question. When will your book be published? And is it available for us while you're here? Or you have any advance copies to sell? I'm just really curious.
Thank you. That's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice of you. I wanted to say too, thank you to Bree, and I think she's already taken off. Yeah. I got up and I was nervous, and then after I sat down, I thought, oh, I didn't thank Bree for that nice introduction. Oops. But it's you could pre-order it now. So if you go on to Amazon or wherever, you could order it, but it won't be mailed to you until February. I think it's February 20th. That's nice of you. It's on now. Okay.
Any hard questions?
I have a question for Andrew and Deborah and Kimiko, if it's relevant. I missed the beginning of your reading. Both of you have talked about place in relation to your work, and I would love if you could just elaborate on that a little bit, like how it influences your writing, Deborah, and how it influences your printmaking, Andrew.
Sure. Okay. I am very influenced by where I am. I, really cherish my walk to work because it gives me a chance to kind of like get ready to be in the space that I need, the headspace I need to be in when I'm concentrating on what I'm doing in my work. And each day is completely different. You have, tons of people one day, and then it will be completely empty, and I, take a different route every day. But I find that going to and from like that really changes the way that I think about when I'm starting to work, how I start it. And I can't really describe how it does that, but if I don't have that going through that space and that time period, coming to and from, something just doesn't really click when I try to start to work. So.
I guess what I would say about place is, for me, it's intimately tied to also time. Like the way that I remember a place from the 1970s or the 1980s, the way that I remember a river or a canyon or something that is really loved, and kind of seeing the way that has changed over the years is a huge part of setting for me. And I think it's maybe tied to nostalgia, like knowing what it was, remembering and writing for that particular generation that I'm kind of existing in my mind is part of it. And another thing I would say is that I don't think I could have written about the Southwest in the way that I did if I had never left there. There's something about going away from a place and, living in Europe or traveling in Africa or Asia and being all over the world and then feeling the draw to come back. The distance was helpful.
Thankfully, they answered while I was thinking, like place, because I didn't really I didn't really like the community I grew up in as a little girl. So I was trying to think of how place might figure in my work over the years. And it popped into my head that place is really my mother's body, and maybe the page also.
Thank you. I have a question for Kimiko. You talked about science, language, and I'm just curious, when you're doing your research, do you really have to know what those long words mean, or is it the sound, and how do you work with that?
Yeah, when I was a little girl, I would just be delighted in weird words and foreign words, and the idea that one word could mean many things, or there are many ways to say one word, like in different languages. So I just love the sound. I'm captivated by language itself. So when it comes to science, it has to do with, there's something magical about these exotic words for me, because it's an area I know really nothing about. So I'll read articles. I mostly go to the science section of the New York Times because it's written for people like me, so I'll go there, and that's where I'll start. And sometimes I'll literally have the article right next to me, and I'll be writing or typing, as the case may be, and finding my way into the material. So it could be a word that becomes like a portal from the science material to whatever.
Writers, but I think it could be answered in about any medium. A lot of you talked about your writing or your work taking a long time to come to its like final form, or whatever you would call it, if it even is finished. But I'm wondering if you could speak to writing about or working on working on something that is from the past, and you like can't get into that headspace anymore, if it's maybe it's difficult or maybe even it's a good thing, but a lot of stuff has happened to you since, or like how do you work on multiple things at once as time goes on, or how do you let things go if too much time has passed? And like I've been writing about things that happened to me a few years ago that my life has changed so much, so it's hard for me to continue working on that stuff. For me, it's poetry, but I don't want to necessarily abandon it. So I hope that makes sense and can answer it relating to whatever medium you like. Thanks.
I'll start. Thank you, my student, for that question. Since I'm an older writer, I'm looking at sometimes work from decades. I'm actually working on my new and selected. So I am literally looking back at work that a very young woman wrote. I didn't come up through an MFA program. I was at Iowa as an undergraduate, so I had incredible workshops. But I feel now that I'm an older woman who is tending to that young woman's work. So I am allowing myself to tweak and revise a little bit because I would like to have her clarify some things, not explain, but just make things a little sharper or more ambiguous in a way that works. So I'm trying to mentor that young writer in a way. Now that's going back very far. Sometimes there's work and I haven't been able to get into it. And then I'll write a list of why it's important to me. I'll literally think, why is this science article important to me? And it'll be a way for me to find my way in. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
I think that I write a lot through a system of rewards. And part of the reward is the topic. Like, I have to have obsessions. And if things fall away and they aren't true obsessions for me, then the reward isn't there, and I just let it lie fallow. I don't worry about it. I have a lot of work that is in drawers and stuck around. And the other nice thing about letting things sit, though, when you go back and look at them, and they were written by a younger you, is that you have more freedom to allow the work to tell you what it is, rather than trying to force some meaning onto it. So there's freedom with it. And a lot of times the words, they want to lead you. And your ego wants to shove the words into a container where they don't want to fit. And it resists you because you're so busy trying to lead and have some sort of cautionary tale or moral of the story. And then when you let that go, suddenly you see hints and clues and evidence of what this thing wants to be without you to direct it. And there's a beautiful discovery in that. Again, one of the rewards. So I would say, never be afraid that something has sat for a long time isn't going to reach its moment where it comes ripe, as long as it's something that is really an obsession for you. You'll find it.
Well, I would say that sounds like an analog of painting also, because when I'm painting, sometimes I reach a place where I've tried to push my own idea into the painting almost too much, so I'll turn it towards the wall, and other ones will come up, and I had reached some kind of impasse in how to resolve it, and then it's always telling me what it needs. So I have to kind of just take a back seat and be responsive to what's there and what the painting is saying, how I should proceed with it. And then it happens quite quickly. And it usually resolves itself. Not always, but.
Hello. So I think the first part is probably for Debra, and then the second part is for Debra and Kimiko. My question for Debra is, I was really moved by what you were sharing about how it wasn't about the when of publishing the book, but it was about the process of all that you've worked through. And I was really moved to hear about your inner life with your sons too. And I guess my question is if you could share more about the process of writing autoethnography, and specifically kind of like the emotional process of moving through such complex and heavy histories, like for a nation and also in your own personal life, enough to see it through to completion, like as a book project. And then maybe for Deborah and Kimiko together, how do you maintain, as writers, kind of your own authentic voice and process in the midst of like voices of industry or like the publishing world, if that ever comes up for you?
You know, I'm happy that you asked that. I don't think that we talk enough about self-care, especially when you're doing autoethnography or memoir or personal essay. It's exhausting. There are times where you work for 2 hours a day and then you just have to go lay down and rest because it's too much. And a lot of it, I think, that helps is knowing that your writing life is not only the time that you spend at your desk. So you sit down and you capture some images that mean something to you, and you're moving towards meaning, but then you go for a very long walk, or like I like to row. And as I do that, I refuse to let myself flee the whatever it is that I'm trying to wrap my mind around. And I heard this wonderful advice from an Australian writer named Ali Cobby Eckerman, who came to IA. And she said that when she got very, very tired and she didn't know if she could write, she would go to an elder's house and sit with them. And she was like, I didn't even talk to them, I just hold their hand. And when I left, I knew why I was doing it. So I guess I took a lot of solace in kind of grounding myself in my community, grounding myself in the elders that I love, asking myself a lot of there were a lot of ethical considerations that I had to ponder. I think it was one of the reasons I resisted writing memoir initially, was very taboo in indigenous culture to foreground yourself. You know, we come in, this is my clan, these are my parents, these are my grandparents. Like, you're this little thing at the end. It's like the opening of Beowulf or something. So you're like, you know, you're not supposed to do that. And so there's a lot of fear. And I think that just acknowledging how you have to pace yourself. And I would see old classmates from Iowa at different conventions, and their books had come out right away, and they're like, what's the matter with you? You're such a dope writer, you're taking forever. And I really had to create this space around myself and be like, you know what? My time is my time is my time. I'm gonna take however long it takes until I feel good about it. And I guess to close, I would say that, you know, Ethan Kanan was one of the teachers that I studied with. I took a fiction class with him because we kind of cross genres and study with who we want in Iowa. And he said, it's never the student that comes through that has huge amounts of talent that goes off and does great. He's like, he told me this one time, he was like, it's the student who has a lot of character. And I thought about that a lot because I thought, oh, I think I sometimes have bad character. I was scared. But in the end, I think what he meant was a respect for the product itself, a respect for the story, a respect for the words, a respect for the process, that you're doing it in a way that feels like you owe something to it, and that you can't rush that, and why would you? So yeah, I hope that helps, yeah. And the second part of the question, do you remember? You go first.
Authentic voice over the years, I think the question was, River, yes?
Maybe just staying true to yourself in the midst of any voices from like the publishing industry.
Oh, yeah. Well, if my work isn't meaningful to me, then why should it mean anything to anyone else? So that's where I start. And I don't I mean, I've been with Norton for a number of books now, but I don't assume that they're going to take my next book. I just hope and I write towards the book that I want and hope they take it. So I'm lucky.
I could tell you a little anecdote about that for me, is that when I first left Iowa and I was writing very dense, sort of a very dense prose style that was kind of fragmented and braided. It had a lot of white space and it demanded a great deal of my readers. And at a certain point, I started reading authors that had kind of a more, it seemed like their desire was to communicate. And there was kind of a clear simplicity to what their style, that they were telling their narrative in. And I started to get curious about it. I started to think, why don't I tell a story in a way that is not so veiled and that doesn't require so much? And I started to realize that a lot of times I jumped ahead and back in time and I did all this stuff because I thought, I think I might be trying to convince my reader that I'm intelligent, that it was a defense mechanism, that I couldn't stay and live and reside in the child on the page because I was so busy telling people, look over here, but look over here. I'm an adult now and everything is really good. You know? So it was like I really challenged myself to say, what if what I tried to do was communicate a very clear, where the reader could not escape what it was like to grow up on a reservation in the 1970s and the 1980s in a border town. What if I allowed that to emerge? And it was a huge shift in the style. And the point of telling is what I hear you asking about. Who is this story for? And I talked to Billy Ray Belcourt, who, you know, he's a Rhodes Scholar. He's amazing. He's a Canadian Indigenous poet. And he told me the story, and this sealed the deal for me. He was like, I went home to the reservation, and my little sister came over with her friend. And her friend was like all gaga over me. And I said, did you read my book? And she said, I got it. And she said, but it's, you know, it's hard for me to read and understand. And you know, she's young. She'll grow up and she'll become more but he told me it was really funny because I always think that I'm writing for Indigenous people, and I am. But what if the people that really can engage with my material the most are like highly educated, you know, graduate students? What about my own kids, like the friends of my sister? And when he said that, I thought, yeah, I'm gonna go for this. And that's really when the book shifted to become a memoir rather than an essay collection, because in Iowa we're all about essay collections.
I just have a follow-up. Thank you. So beautiful to see all of your work and hear all of your stories. And on the writing side, it comes across as though the both of you have incredible memories, that you've got incredible capacity to recall things that happened a long time ago, and the detail is there, and all of that. And I'm wondering if you're just naturally inclined to have these great clarity of memory and visual memory and sense memory, or are there tools that you're using to help you recall things or reconstruct things, or as you were saying, prompts? I mean, can you help us understand a little bit about your process, about taking you back to the place where you can recall and or invent in a way that feels authentic?
Yeah, I guess, well, in my class, I've made reference to this a couple times this evening. I give a writing prompt, and the idea is to make a list, you know, things that are unsuitable. Give me 10 things that are unsuitable, right? Or 10 things that make you panic, large and small, right? So when you're doing that and you're just writing it down, low stakes, you usually find something there, and then the list can become a piece in and of itself, or it can be generative and think, oh, well, I'm going to use that and do something else. So it's having a lot of stuff around, which we've all talked about, scraps of paper, old work that you go back to. So I don't have a great memory, actually. But I write about, I've just been around for a while, so I've been writing, and then I write about things that are happening in the past, say, 5-10 years, and sometimes longer. But
I think the more you write, the more you remember. And I think that supposition is important, and allowing yourself to imagine. You can Google what did most famous records in 1982. You can kind of try to delve that way. You'd be surprised. I've shown things to my father, and he's like, "How did you know that?" About people that, family lore, but I fill in the gaps or whatever. And he's like, "Yeah, that's really accurate." And I'm like, "I don't know how that happens. It's kind of a magic in writing." But I would say the most important thing is to remember that art is artifice. So what looks like stream of consciousness, people actually are working really hard to make it look like that. What looks like easy memory is actually a ton of research and a lot of rewriting. It's always artifice.
if I may have the last question for Andrew. When you talked about some prompts for your work, which was actually, I think it was a different artist, but you were pointing to the cutout shapes that would just be rearranged. Do you have other prompts like that for yourself, go-to prompts for your work?
Cleaning.
Okay.
I just can't get started to work unless everything is in order and clean, and it's like just at my fingertips and there's no visual noise around really. I mean, there is obviously, but trying to get it a little bit lower, because my mental space gets filled up when I see a lot of detritus around.